Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Trans Stupid. Now, I was hoping that we might have had a little bit of a quiet week considering the Easter holidays, but it turns out that actually no, even over public holidays, there is no break from the stupidity that comes out within the trans community. Now, it's kind of good for me because I get to do actual content on it, but it also kind of highlights just the level of insanity that we're currently dealing with. So what kinds of issues have happened over the last week? One of the first things I'm going to talk about involves quite a big YouTube personality who, being a gay man, naturally offended the trans community because of course that happened. James Charles apologised after fans called him out for invalidating trans people. We can all learn from this complex discussion. James Charles found himself at the centre of yet another controversy after a questionable discussion he held on his YouTube channel with his fellow influencer Jeff Wittick. What started off as a seemingly casual "I had my crush do my makeup" challenge turned into a deeper conversation about gender and sexuality. Unfortunately, many people ended up hurt and put off by statements Charles made about how he understands his attraction to transgender men and what it implies about their value. Charles explained, in science, in regards to LGBTQ people, there's what's called the Kinsey scale. The Kinsey scale goes from 0 to 6, 0 being completely straight and 6 being completely gay. If I had to put myself on it, I would put myself as a 5.5. So he was then asked, are you not even fully gay? And Charles' response, I mean, no. There have been girls in the past who I thought were really, really beautiful. There's also been some trans guys in the past too, who I was like really into for a moment in time, especially living in LA, where everybody is a lot more open-minded. I think that honestly, the majority of guys are wanting to experiment. That comment went down as well as you would expect in current year. A lot of trans people voiced their fury at Charles, saying things like, as a gay trans man who has been turned away by gay men, not even romantically or sexually, for not being male enough, I can full-heartedly state that James Charles' statement is, in fact, transphobic as all fuck. Another person said, what saddens me the most is the amount of trans people who looked up to James Charles and had to listen to that. And a further comment added, with everything that James Charles said, he is a friendly reminder that it's transphobic to say someone's sexuality changes if they're attracted to a trans person, because you're implying trans men aren't actually men or trans women aren't actually women. Thanks. We always hear these arguments from trans activists where they don't seem to understand that people have sexual preferences. And this is especially so for gay and lesbian people. A gay guy is generally going to have an idea of the kind of guy that he is attracted to. And I don't think it takes a lot to figure out that the kind of guy he would like has a penis. Wild, right? But for some reason, not being into a trans guy, somebody who has a vagina, means that you therefore hate them, or you're questioning like how valid they are as a man. And it's not about whether they are valid or not. It's a simple point of actually understanding what someone's sexuality is. And believe it or not, genitals can be a big part of that. Your average gay man on the street is not going to be into vaginas. That's not to say that they would never find a trans guy attractive, but it could potentially be a big turn-off, in the same way that for a lesbian, finding out that a trans woman has a penis could also be a big turn-off. But of course he was going to attract flack for this. Of course this was going to be a controversy. He's a big name in the YouTube community. He runs quite a big makeup channel. And being an LGBTQ person, he is absolutely expected to toe the line. And naturally, when all of this blew up, he did what you might think is the most sensible thing to do, but is probably one of the dumbest things, and issue an apology. Charles said, in an attempt to explain the very complex concept of sexuality and mine in my vid today, I unintentionally implied that my trans brothers and sisters aren't valid. This is not what I was trying to say. You are valid in your identity. I apologise and should have chosen my words wiser. So how well do you think that went down? Well, if you know what current progressive mobs are like in 2019, you already have your answer. One delightful Twitter user wrote, "Fuck James Charles and any cis person accepting his apology on behalf of trans people, as if the apology was even for you. If you don't identify as transgender, then you don't get to decide how trans people should feel, behave, or which apologies they should or shouldn't accept." Oh, so do I get to say? Do I get to say whether trans people should accept his apology or not? Or am I just going to have to leave this to the outrage mob? I'll tell you what. If we're going to have people speaking on behalf of a whole collective, let me give it a try. James Charles, I accept your apology. In fact, I don't even think you need to apologise. But naturally, I'm true scum, so my opinion doesn't really count. I've always found it weird when we have this outrage over what gay and lesbian or even straight people are attracted to. If you're into trans people, that's perfectly fine. If you're not, then that's fine. Is it 100% straight if you're a dude who's into a chick with a dick? Arguably not, but who the fuck cares? If you're into it, you are. If you're not, fine. Labels don't really mean all that much in current year anyway. This is nothing more than manufactured outrage. But as per usual, the trans community is more than happy to indulge in it. It gives people a real sense of victimhood, and you can't underestimate how good that makes these people feel. Charles is probably now going to be tarnished with this anti-trans brush for quite a while at this point. Of course, weirdly, non-binary people haven't come into this conversation. I'm surprised that no one's tried to fit NBs into there. Hopefully we can all accept that we don't have to sleep with them, although I've got a feeling that there's going to be some campaign coming up soon saying it's NB-phobic to not want to shag one of these. Now, James Charles is quite a big name within the whole LGBT community, and he's someone who has always kind of been seen as like a little bit of an ally, this week getting burnt by it. But he isn't the only one. John Boyne, Irish author, deletes Twitter after abuse from activists. The author, John Boyne, has deleted his Twitter account and written a robust response after being criticised by online activists for comments he made about the trans community. Boyne is about to release a young adult novel called My Brother's Name is Jessica, which follows a young boy's experience after his older sibling comes out as transgender. Writing in the Irish Times at the weekend, Boyne, who is gay and frequently includes LGBT characters in his novels, said he was apprehensive about how the book will be received by the trans community, but that he hoped people would see he had treated the subject with care. However, he also wrote that he rejects the word cis, adding, "I don't consider myself a cis man, I consider myself a man. I reject the notion that someone can force an unwanted term onto another." Following the publication of the article, Aoife Martin of Transgender Equality Network Ireland wrote a response piece in which she said whether Boyne likes it or not, he is cis, and he has cis privilege. It's just a pity he can't seem to recognise it. Yeah, you have that label. You have that label that we've given you, and you like it. By the way, don't label us. Don't label us. That's transphobic. That's transphobic. But accept your label that I'm giving you. Yeah. Criticism of Boyne was more strident on Twitter, with some calling for a boycott of the novel. Seriously, just because the guy said he doesn't want to be called cis. Any kind of goodwill he's built up with these activists has just been instantly thrown into the water. Of course. Of course this happens. They pointed out issues such as the title's misgendering of the main character and that the novel depicts the physical assault of a trans woman. Hold on a second. You guys always harp on about how trans women are being assaulted every single day, that there's an epidemic of trans murder. And yet, all of a sudden it's problematic when someone writes about this bullshit that you constantly spew? That's somehow the outrage here? Jesus Christ, if you don't like people running with this narrative of trans women are always victims, maybe don't run with it yourself. Maybe try empowerment. That's not too hard, is it? Responding to the criticism, Boyne said in a statement that he was appalled by the abuse and threats he had received and has decided to delete his Twitter account. He said, "I've been called vulgar names, mocked for my appearance, my looks, my weight, my sexuality, and even for the crime of being bald. Any responses I've made have been unfailingly courteous. The breaking point was Monday night when, within a few minutes of each other, I received one tweet simply saying, 'Fuck John Boyne,' and another from a freshly set up account using a fake name telling me to be careful when I'm out in public. I have always tried to write with consideration and empathy, and I will continue to do so, but removing myself from the toxic atmosphere of social media seems right to me now. Boyne did make clear that he was not blaming the trans community for the social media attacks on him. For the record, I do not believe the trans community bears any relationship to or any responsibility for the actions of online trolls. As a gay man, I stand 100% behind all trans people. I respect them as brave pioneers. I applaud their determination to live authentic lives, despite the abuse they also receive, and I will always do so. I have to commend him for not treating trans people as a whole collective here, and so it's very easy to do in the kind of situation where you're receiving constant abuse from these activists, and naturally the bigger names do absolutely nothing to call out this atrocious behaviour. It's good that he recognises that there are people like me, and then there are people like, well, basically like the troons, who will troon out over any small crime that someone may have done. But this is yet another example of the trans community having a perfectly good ally to them. They always want these allies, but the second an ally kind of breaks rank even a little bit, that's the big crime. And then, you know, there's just this whole scorched earth policy that they have. Get rid of them, like they completely unperson them. I completely understand why people don't like being labelled as cis. It's completely reasonable. I don't like it. When I'm given labels that I don't like, I'll often hear arguments from the more extreme side of the gender critical argument, where they'll tell me that not to call them cis, but then also I can't call myself a trans woman and I have to accept being called a Tim because that's the label that they've given me, and if I don't like it, then I'm a misogynist. I think that's absolute garbage. Don't put your labels on me, I won't put my labels on you. I think that's a fair trade-off. And I completely support Boyne here. I think that it's reasonable for him to not want a label that he doesn't really identify with. What's wrong with calling a man nowadays? Why does everyone have to be cis? It's just weird. As to the book itself, admittedly, I don't know a lot about it. Maybe this could be a great book. Maybe this will be something that's very inclusive and respectful for trans people out there. Maybe it'll be very helpful for some people to read. And unfortunately, the community doesn't care. You committed the sin. You committed the sin of disagreement. You might as well just burn the book now. To these people, that's all it's good for. Well, let's move on to something a little bit more wholesome. How about video games, and the most wholesome video game company out there, Nintendo, who this week released a new download for the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate that allows people to make their own levels. Naturally, this wasn't going to be controversial at all, right? Like, people obviously weren't going to find things to be offended by. Oh, for God's sake. Nintendo angers gamers after it deletes custom Smash Bros. Stage featuring trans flag. Nintendo has come under scrutiny for deleting a gamer's custom-made stage on Super Smash Bros. Ultimate that featured a transgender pride flag. The player, known as Warm Safina on social media, who seemingly made the stage, took to Twitter to share her confusion over it being erased. Tagging the Japanese company directly, she asked, "In what way is the trans flag and the title, Trans Rights Now, inappropriate and/or harmful?" before going on to explain that she'd reached out to customer support for answers. Shortly after those initial tweets, Safina continued the exact reason it was taken down was because it was considered a political statement. She also noticed her account was also suspended for 9 hours. The supervisor told me they personally don't agree with the ruling and recommended I and others contact corporate or visit the Smash support forums and leave messages that the trans flag and messages of support for trans rights shouldn't be prohibited. Many replied to Warm Safina's thread with messages or support saying things like, "It's important to stand against the H menace wherever it appears. Thank you for your service," and "This is a bad look for Nintendo in current year." Another person said, "I ain't got no time for that shit in current year." So yeah, there was a lot of outrage online because Nintendo decided to delete a level which has a message saying trans rights now, and it is the trans rights now part of it that got the level taken down. Nintendo are notoriously apolitical, and even with LGBT issues they only introduce this stuff when it isn't particularly controversial for them to do so. The actual statement trans rights now, whether you like it or not, whether you think it's a just cause or not, is a political statement, and that goes for any kind of group. group. You can say that it is as moral and just a cause as you would like, but it is politics. And it wasn't targeted just for being trans. Games journalist Sophia Norwitz actually managed to find quite a few stages that have the trans flag on it, but they've been kept up because they don't have a political statement attached to it. There's no issue with just having the trans pride flag in Smash. If you really want to fight on it and have violence on it, Christ, you know, I thought that would be transphobic, fighting on the flag. But whatever, if that's what you want to do, go knock yourself out. But the last thing I want to touch on today is something which has actually quite surprised me, and it has happened in the last couple of days. So some of you might have watched a video which I made last week, and it's the first in my series Pillars of the Community, focused on a particular individual with the initials JY. Now, in the video, I couldn't name exactly who JY was. This is because JY has weaponized their identity to take down as much content on them as they possibly can. However, I want to start making a little bit more of a stand against this individual. I will not be referring to them with their preferred pronouns, so to speak, because I do not respect them as a trans person. Having researched this individual, I think they are clearly abusing the system. I am also not going to refer to them by their female name. On the flip side, I understand that YouTube's rules are that you can't dead name or misgender trans people, so I can't refer to this person by their older name. However, I'm just going to be using their surname, which is Yaniv. Now, Yaniv has been a big name within the Canadian trans politics scene for the past couple of months, in particular since the Wax My Balls incident came to light. And one of their previous supporters is another individual who I've mentioned on this channel quite a lot, Morgane Oger, who you might remember her as the activist who managed to get a rape crisis centre shut down because they don't accept trans women. Now, Oger had previously defended Yaniv against some of the allegations when it was pointed out to Oger that Yaniv used both male and female names. Oger just responded, well, transitioning is a difficult period. And when the allegations were flagged to Oger, she just battered them off, basically saying that there isn't really any evidence, you need to substantiate them. Well, it turns out that Oger has been doing a little bit of soul searching, and interestingly enough, she's now chosen this time to call out Yaniv on their toxic behaviour. In an article interestingly entitled, "Preying on Children Makes You a Predator Regardless of Who You Are," Oger says, "I have dreaded writing this article for the months I have considered it. The people who advised me recommended against it, but I feel it is necessary. Holding this knowledge while vetting it has kept me up at night, and it is not with levity I use the word predator literally. I wish it wasn't a transgender person or someone saying they are part of the LGBTQ+ community who has been doing what Yaniv has reportedly been doing for years, as far back as 2013. I am mindful that it doesn't matter what Yaniv's gender is or how they got to where they are. It is valid, and that's not a debating point for me. I don't think it's valid. Debate me." I know that with over 150,000 transgender persons in Canada, it is inevitable that some of us misbehave. Transgender and non-binary persons are artists, housewives, doctors, a judge, politicians, chronically underemployed, professionals, and blue-collar workers. Like other communities, ours also feature a number who are cheaters, predators, liars, rapists, paedophiles, pimps, and others who do harmful things. Knowing the correlation between marginalisation and suppression and individual acts of misbehaviour, I would not be surprised to learn that the proportion of miscreants who are transgender is higher than the general population. It usually is with oppressed groups. But the things that people have told me Yaniv has done to them are awful and can't be swept out of our consciousness. Awful things have been reported and need to be taken seriously. Interestingly that you're only taking it serious now, despite this being raised to you months ago. But anyway, I met Yaniv at an event where I appeared as a speaker. I had just been on a panel on transgender rights after performing in the cast of Transcripts Part 1. The Women, at the Culture in Vancouver, and after a Q&A, they were one of the people I spoke to in the audience. We had a very brief chat. Yaniv brought up something about human rights cases and an interest in standing up for transgender rights. I wonder if that had anything to do with waxing balls. I encourage transgender people to fight for our rights and to force difficult conversations out into the open. I encouraged any valid complaints being filed to get the difficult conversation started. So is that Oger basically saying that she is responsible for wax my balls? Christ. In January 2019, I was sent an alarming tweet regarding Yaniv. I followed it up and tried to establish if there was evidence that was telling the truth. It was. This post is also about difficult conversations, the conversation we need to have to address mortifying misdeeds in our own communities. Their stories included reports and evidence of outrageously inappropriate acts, some towards children who are tweens and teens. Some of the material has survived as screenshots, and what I saw shows what strikes me as a pattern of predatory behaviour. I am not in law enforcement or a lawyer, but as a mom of kids under 14, I was horrified by what the women had told me, and I believe them. It is not lost on me that transphobic anger brought this matter to my attention in the first place, and only by targeting me personally. I wonder if the hatred helped or hindered this all. I suspect we will never know. I deeply regret the harmful behaviour of some people, and that includes the ones aimed at my community. If only mindsets were not easily driven to hatred by people manipulating affirmation bias. Okay, so this is a part of Oger's big Yaniv hit piece that I particularly disagree with. As I discussed in Pillars of the Community, Yaniv's exploits have been going on for years and for a long time before they came out as being trans. None of the outrage that has really been brought up because of Yaniv's behaviour has to do with the trans community. At least, not exactly. It's about the way in which this individual has handled themselves in a disgusting manner, and is clearly using the trans community as a shield. The fact that anyone who referred to this person by their male name, even when they had their male name on the Twitter account, got permanently banned, shows they were using it as a bloody shield. And yet, for some reason, Oger can't seem to see this. In fact, in a tweet following this, she put the blame of how Yaniv was able to get away with all this for so long on the TERFs. Now, this is a stretch. I can agree that there are times in which gender-critical feminists go after trans people with not much more than them being trans, but Yaniv is certainly not an example of that. Yaniv has done very, very toxic, dangerous and deranged things we have evidence of. I do not believe that they were fueled by a hatred of trans people in exposing him. And if they were, so what? It's brought to light what an atrocious human being this person is. But even so, this wouldn't be much of an issue if it wasn't for people like yourself demanding that we respect Yaniv's gender, and we need to always listen to trans people, and anyone can be trans. You know, open border on being trans. Well, no, I say build a bloody wall on being trans, and you'll stop people like Yaniv getting in there, and then being able to claim that they are part of a group and use that as a way of shutting down any kind of discussion on them. I'm glad that Oger is distancing herself from Yaniv. I think that is a good thing, but is it too little too late? I'm not too sure. Oger has a bit of a weird attitude towards like the whole debate as it is, and this is probably the best that we would ever get from her. But I think that there needs to be more calling out of Yaniv. Spread the video that I did on Yaniv, I think that would be helpful. But also, there is an article done by Louise, who you might recognise as the woman who was targeted by Yaniv as a Cimarelli fan back in 2013, who wrote a brilliant piece detailing her experiences with this toxic individual. I'm going to link it in the description down below, and please share that as well. Now, a lot of people have been saying that Oger is doing this because the net might be closing in around Yaniv, but I personally doubt that that's happening. Yaniv's activity doesn't come across as someone who feels the pressure of the law on them. In fact, when this piece has been pointed out to Yaniv, they've not even acknowledged it at all. In fact, they seem quite cocky. So I wouldn't get my hopes up that the police are going to be knocking on Yaniv's door anytime soon. But having said that, who knows? I mean, I always assumed that something would have happened with Jess Bradley by now. I was wrong about that. You can never really predict this stuff. Hopefully something will happen. I think it's very clear that too much dodgy stuff has gone on for this to just be brushed under the carpet. I think that the people speaking out against Yaniv, particularly people who have fallen victim to them, are incredibly brave, and hopefully exposing this person for who they are is going to save people in the long run. But what are your thoughts on the stories that I've covered? Is there anything in particular that I've missed out? A lot did happen over the last week, but I don't have time to cover it all, unfortunately. But please let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you all for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and if you are a fan of my work, please consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, and I will see you all next time. And a special thank you to Kim, Sarah, and the rest of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.